I am happy that I walked in on my husband having sex with his partner. It sounds like a headline from a twisted tabloid, but for me, it was the most liberating moment of my entire life. To understand why I was smiling while my world supposedly crumbled, you have to understand the slow, agonizing death of my marriage over the last year. My husband, Matthew, is 39, and I am 34. A year ago, he sat me down in our living room, the same room where we had shared 1,000 quiet mornings, and told me he wanted an open marriage. He didn't sugarcoat it, and he didn't offer a gentle transition. He told me, with a coldness that still makes my skin crawl, that he was no longer sexually attracted to me. He looked me in the eyes and said I had aged poorly and that I was too loose to give him an orgasm anymore. He said he still loved me as a companion, but his physical needs were no longer being met by a woman who looked like me. He wanted us to remain a happy couple to the outside world while we both found sexual satisfaction elsewhere. I was devastated, paralyzed by a level of insecurity I didn't know existed. I agreed to the arrangement, not because I wanted it, but because I was terrified of losing the only life I knew. We set strict rules to protect the fragile remains of our bond. We had to introduce our partners to each other. We had to be honest about every encounter. We had to get tested regularly. Most importantly, we were never, under any circumstances, to bring a partner into our family home. We could build emotional connections, but love was strictly off limits. We were to come home to each other every night, sleep in the same bed, and wake up together like a normal married couple. A few weeks later, Matthew brought home Jamie. Jamie is 24 years old. He looks like a Renaissance painting brought to life, with a smile that defines the very essence of youth. Standing next to him, I felt like a ghost, a faded version of a person who no longer mattered. I watched my husband's type change in real time, moving from the woman he promised to grow old with to a boy who reminded him of everything he feared losing. The introduction was a masterclass in humiliation as I stood there trying to be the cool, modern wife while my heart was screaming. For months, I lived in a state of quiet desperation, watching them leave for hotel rooms while I stayed home and cleaned the house. But yesterday, everything changed. I decided to come home on my lunch break for a quick nap, thinking the house would be empty. As soon as I opened the front door, I heard the sounds coming from upstairs. My heart didn't break. It turned into a block of ice. I walked up the stairs, pushed the bedroom door open, and saw them. They were in our bed, the bed where we had spent 10 years of our lives. They didn't even hear me at first. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the man who told me I was too old and too loose break every single rule we had created to save our marriage. I didn't scream, I didn't throw things, and I didn't demand an explanation. I simply turned around, walked out of the house, and went back to work. I wasn't even tired anymore. The adrenaline had washed away every ounce of exhaustion. As I sat at my desk, my phone began to explode with texts and calls from both of them. Matthew was frantic, and Jamie was apologetic, but I just turned the device off and stared at the wall. I stayed at work until 9 p.m. And then went to a late-night movie just to feel the presence of strangers in the dark. I drove around the outskirts of the city for hours, finally pulling over to sleep on the side of a quiet road. When I walked back into the house at 8 a.m. this morning, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Matthew and Jamie were sitting at the kitchen table, looking like they hadn't slept a wink. Jamie looked genuinely sad, his youthful face clouded with guilt. Matthew, however, looked absolutely pissed. I walked past them and gave a simple, cheerful good morning as if nothing had happened. Matthew followed me into the bedroom, his voice rising with every step. He told me that what I did was wrong and that my reaction was completely uncalled for. He called me overdramatic and said I was acting like a child for making him stay up all night worrying. He actually tried to gaslight me into believing that my discovery of his betrayal was a personal attack on him. I stopped him mid-sentence, turning around with a calm I had never possessed before. I looked him in the eyes and asked for a divorce. The shock on his face was the most beautiful thing I had seen in years. I told him that he didn't love me, and more importantly, I didn't want to love him anymore. I told him I was tired of being lonely in my own home and tired of having my appearance nitpicked by a man who was supposed to be my protector. I told him that if he wasn't attracted to me, he should go and marry someone he actually wanted to be with. He tried to grab my hand, telling me I was just tired and didn't know what I was saying. He tried to lead me to the bed, the very same bed where he had been with Jamie less than 24 hours ago. I smacked his hand away with a force that surprised us both. In that moment, I realized that I had spent years letting people walk all over me, but that version of me died the second I saw them in that room. I didn't want an open marriage, and I certainly didn't want a man who considered me a second-rate option. But here's the first twist you didn't see coming. While I was driving around last night, I didn't just sleep on the side of the road. I called my sister, who happens to be a high-end forensic accountant. I had been suspicious for months about where Matthew was getting the money for the lavish gifts he was buying Jamie. He told me it was from his personal savings, but I knew his salary wouldn't cover the designer watches and weekend trips. My sister spent 4 hours digging into our joint accounts while I waited in a 24-hour diner. She found out that Matthew had been funneling money out of my inheritance fund for the last 6 months. He wasn't just cheating on me physically and emotionally. He was stealing my future to fund his midlife crisis. He had drained nearly $40,000 from the money my grandmother left me for my own retirement. So when I stood in that kitchen this morning, I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a woman who held the smoking gun to his entire reputation. When Matthew tried to argue that the rules didn't matter because the marriage was already open, I dropped the bomb. I told him I knew about the money. I told him that if he didn't agree to a quiet, uncontested divorce where I kept the house and he walked away with nothing, I would take the records to the police. Embezzlement and fraud aren't taken lightly, especially when the paper trail is as messy as his. He turned pale, the anger draining from his face, until he looked even older than the 39 years he lamented. But that's not even the biggest twist. As Matthew stood there trembling, Jamie stood up from the table. He didn't go to Matthew's side. He walked over to me. Jamie looked at Matthew with pure disgust and told him that he was done. Then Jamie turned to me and handed me his phone. He had recorded their entire conversation from the night before, while they were waiting for me to come home. Matthew hadn't been worried about me. He had been bragging to Jamie about how he was going to manage me. He told Jamie that I was too weak to ever leave, and that he would eventually convince me to give him full control of the inheritance so they could move to Europe together. Matthew had been planning to dump me as soon as the account was empty. Jamie told me that he had no idea Matthew was stealing from me or that I was being treated this way. He thought we were a consensual, happy, open couple who were looking for a third. Jamie had been lied to just as much as I had. He told me he had already packed his bags and was leaving, but he wanted me to have the recording for the divorce proceedings. Matthew tried to lung for the phone, but Jamie blocked him, showing a strength that Matthew clearly didn't expect. I stood there, watching the two men who had occupied my thoughts for a year, and I felt nothing but peace. The man I thought I loved was a thief and a coward. The boy I thought was my enemy turned out to be the one who handed me the keys to my freedom. I told Matthew he had 1 hour to pack a suitcase and leave. I told him that if he was still in the house by 10 I would call the precinct. He tried to cry, tried to apologize, tried to tell me that Jamie had corrupted his mind, but I wasn't listening anymore. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch. I watched Jamie walk to his car, give me a small, sad nod, and drive away. A few minutes later, Matthew dragged his suitcase down the stairs, looking like a broken man. He didn't look at me as he left, and I didn't look at him. I just watched the sun come up over the garden I had spent years tending. I realized then that I wasn't too old or too loose or any of the things he had called me. I was 34 years old, I owned my own home, and I was finally, for the first time in my life, completely alone. And for the first time in my life, I realized that being alone was 1,000 times better than being with someone who made me feel invisible. I took a sip of my coffee and felt the weight of 10 years lift off my shoulders. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the victor. I had walked in on my husband having sex with his partner, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I spent the rest of the day changing the locks and calling a lawyer. My lawyer told me that with the forensic accounting and the recording, Matthew didn't have a leg to stand on. He's going to have to pay back every cent he took, even if he has to sell his car and move into a studio apartment. I'm moving forward with a sense of purpose I haven't felt since I was in my early 20s. I'm going to travel, I'm going to fix up the house, and I'm never going to let anyone define my worth based on a number or a physical attribute ever again. Life is too short to be someone's second choice. Life is too short to live by rules designed to break you. I'm happy, I'm free, and I'm just getting started. Matthew thought he was finding youth in Jamie, but he ended up losing everything. I thought I was losing my world, but I ended up finding myself. And in the end, that's the only attraction that really matters. I look in the mirror now, and I don't see the aged woman Matthew described. I see a woman who survived a decade of subtle erosion and came out like a diamond. The wrinkles at the corners of my eyes aren't signs of decay. They are maps of the laughter I'm finally going to have. My body isn't a disappointment. It is the vessel that carried me through the fire. I am 34, I am powerful, and I am finally, truly alive. Every time I think about that afternoon, I don't feel the sting of the betrayal. I feel the rush of the open door, the door that led me out of his shadow and into my own light. I hope Matthew finds whatever it is he was looking for, but I know he won't, because you can't build a life on lies and theft and expect it to stand. But me, I'm building something new, and this time the foundation is made of iron and self-respect. The open marriage is closed. The old life is over. The real story is just beginning. I am no longer the woman who waits. I am the woman who walks away. And let me tell you, the view from here is spectacular. I am free from the gaslighting, free from the insults, and free from the fear. I am 34 years old, and I have never been more beautiful. I have never been more certain. I have never been more me. Thank you, Matthew, for breaking the rules. Because by breaking them, you finally set me free. I don't need a partner to tell me I'm enough. I know I'm enough because I stood my ground when it mattered most. The house is quiet now, but it's a good kind of quiet. It's the quiet of a fresh start. It's the quiet of a woman who finally knows her own name. And that is a sound I could listen to for the rest of my life. I am happy. I am whole. I am home.